He's made a good first impression, and he's obviously thought about himself. Now let's see how well he matches up to my criteria. I'll start with communication. You mentioned giving presentations. Do you find them easy?
Oh, yes. Yeah, no nerves at all.
That's not quite enough.
Talking to groups, no nerves.
Yes, but it doesn't tell us what you've done. We've got to assess you and your answers against these criteria. We're looking for evidence from what you've done that demonstrates your effectiveness with these different skills.
How am I supposed to know what you're looking for?
Come on, we tell you throughout our brochure.
Oh, right.
You have read our brochure.
Our management trainees have to be able to communicate effectively with all levels of people in the organisation. Successful recruits are good team players.
Yes, naturally I've read your brochure.
Ready then?
Sure, thanks.
You mentioned giving presentations. Do you find them easy?
Doing anything in public can be a bit nerve-wracking. At university, I've used tutorials to get some practice. Last year, I took applicants around on open days and got quite used to speaking in front of groups of up to 30.
Talk me through a typical presentation to your tutorial group.
When making a presentation, I try to structure it, setting the scene, then giving my presentation, and finally summarising. That's the secret of it, really.
Now look, all you've done is give us the theory. We need to know what you actually did.
Yes.
You have some examples?
Oh, yes. I'd have to think about them, of course.
That's what you're supposed to do before the interview.
Learn my answers off by heart.
No, you don't want to sound too rehearsed. But every selector you meet will have criteria they're assessing you against. You need examples for each of them.
I'll be right back. Sorry about that.
Right. Are you ready for this interview now?
Yes, well prepared.
Talk me through a typical presentation to your tutorial group.
The most important thing is preparation, so I'd prioritise my key points. I'd make sure it was interesting and relevant to the group. They hadn't studied the topic as much as me. At the start, I'd make sure everyone could hear. I'd introduce myself and my topic. And at the end, I'd summarise my key points and thank people for their attention.
Moving on, what would you say is your management style?
What would I say is my management style? Excuse me.
What now?
Why ask me that? I'm not a manager. I'm applying to become one.
We want to discover your potential as a manager before we invest 2 years training in you.
Ah.
Have you ever had to organise a group?
Yes.
And presumably you've been on the receiving end and been managed yourself? On your course and in holiday jobs?
Yes.
So?
Moving on, what would you say is your management style?
Last summer I spent a month as a volunteer doing conservation work. Because I'd worked for them the previous year, they asked me to lead one of the groups. My approach was to have a meeting with everyone to begin the week. Would you like me to go on?
Please do.
Some people get tongue-tied when they're nervous. Others talk too much. So it's a good idea to check if the selector has heard enough, or if they want to hear more. Judge when they want you to give them specifics, and when it's best to generalise.
How large was the group you managed?
7.
And how long were you the manager for?
3 weeks in the summer.
Selectors like to hear specifics, like how many people did you lead, how long for, and how well did your team perform.
Have you ever had to organise a group activity from scratch?
Last summer a group of us went on a trip to Morocco.
What did you do?
We had to get the money together, arrange the tickets.
Not quite.
What's wrong now?
The question was, what did you do?
Of course. Okay. I organised the tickets, visas and inoculations. I set up a system to keep track of what we needed in terms of money and documentation. Then recorded everyone's payments, booked the tickets and made sure everyone got their jabs.
How many of you were involved?
4.
Who took the decisions?
I decided to try to organise the trip. We all had different jobs to do. and we'd meet informally every week to discuss progress and any problems.
Talk me through it. Who specifically did you organise, and what did you get them to do?
Well, I booked the tickets. Someone else was in charge of finding the cheapest insurance, but I had to keep on at him to do it properly. Then I had to check that everyone's passports were up to date, and that they'd all applied for their visas. Nobody likes getting injections, so I had to nag them all to go along for theirs and get their certificates.
How successful was the trip?
Very. We all got to Morocco, had a great time, and got back safely.
So he did well in organising the holiday. Now I'm going to dig deeper to see if he's management potential. How effective do you feel your leadership was?
Effective? Well, I got the job done.
If you had a second chance, how would you organise it differently?
I'd start planning it earlier in the term, when students have more money available.
Or did you have any problems with people failing to carry out the tasks they were assigned?
The bloke who was supposed to arrange insurance never did.
So what did you do? You said you were in charge of the trip.
I had a bit of a panic. I spent the morning doing phone calls, but I got it sorted out.
Why didn't you know that your colleague hadn't arranged insurance?
I found it difficult to check that everyone was doing what they'd agreed to, without hassling them so much they got fed up.
Okay. So far so good. Now just a bit more pressure. If you were organising a trip like that again, what steps could you take to avoid being let down on aspects of the organisation?
What I should have done is keep tabs on everyone.
Why didn't you?
He was quite sensitive about being pressured, so I left him to get on with it.
Or not?
Quite.
So what did you learn about yourself as a result of organising this excursion?
I found it easier to deal with people who shared my commitment and who stick to their agreements, but I didn't cope so well with people who give you false assurances and don't deliver. But they're just a bunch of students.
Just a bunch of students?
Yeah. Why is he so interested in this holiday? I thought he'd be dying to hear about my final year project, River Basins in Devon. It was brilliant. I got a good grade. And is he allowed to grill me like this?
You must expect to be challenged. It shows we're interested in you. Didn't you notice the questions getting harder? That's a good sign. Remember what we're doing in this selection process. We take it for granted that a geographer will know about river basins. From our point of view, what makes one candidate stand out from the rest is because of what they've done that relates to the world of work, not only to their studies.
So the fact that I've organised a trip like this is relevant?
And the fact that there were people who let you down.
But like I said, this was just a bunch of students. I didn't have any authority. If someone missed a deadline, I was stuck. Whereas if I'd been employing someone, I could make them do things on time.
Not necessarily. Whatever you do, you're always going to have to work with other people, not boss them around, because they'll be your peers, or even senior to you. You'll have to persuade people to do things. The question you brushed off by saying it was just a bunch of students was one of the most important you've been asked today. Give it another try.
I was able to motivate some people better than others. I need to know who's pulling their weight and who's just lazing around. I don't yet have all the people managing skills I need.